Hi, welcome to NeoVantage Studios. I'm Nikita, and today we're going to be looking at the sculpting of Acorn shambles. Starting off, we're looking at a hot wire cutter or Proxon, which I'm going to use to create a base for the sculpt. I'm going to be molding and casting this guy, so a base tends to just make things go smoother. Now, I don't particularly consider myself a professional of anything really. In fact, I'd say I'm very much still learning, whether that be sculpting, mold making, casting, video editing, what have you. And I'd say that this is kind of what that video is, a documentation of learning. And I hope that you can get something from watching the processes that I'm going through, how I go about dealing with the mistakes or changes that I decide to make midway through the process, which, spoilers, is going to happen, in fact specifically with the base. Twice. Maybe more, I can't remember at this point. Anyway, I'm using a self-made circle cutting jig. It's not the most precise, it's not fancy, it's a nail and a piece of plywood. And the circle came out a little larger than I wanted, but that's okay, I can just cut it back down to size. Now, an important thing to note is that my hot wire cutter has a 6-inch throat. So I'm specifically aiming below that 6 inches for the diameter of my circle. I need to rip this down to ½ an inch. Right now it's an inch thick, and that's too thick, so I want it to be a ½ inch for my base. And inspecting it. And here's just, again, another homemade fence. And I'm just gonna take my measurement, make sure I'm at ½ an inch before I start rolling the base along it to get a nice clean cut. Which, that also doesn't really happen, but it's okay because I have 2 factory edges that, if need be, I can use. Now, I have 2 bases. I'll put one to the side for now. I'll use one, put one to the side, keep it for later, and oops, I tried to pick up the cutter by the arm, which snapped the wire. Now that's no big deal, the wire snaps all the time, just even in regular usage, but not the right thing to do, which I knew, but I was a little too conscious of the camera and not paying enough attention to really what my arms were doing. So now, here's the base I'm going to be using. And, well, I guess I'm just trying to decide which one's better. I guess this one. Or that one. Oh, that one. That one right there, I promise. Alright, just moving some things out of the way and grabbing the banding wheel. And we're going to be starting the actual sculpt. Playing with some magnets and maybe spinning. I gotta check the bearings, you know. It's like kicking the tires on a car. But I'm going to be using Siobhan NSP Hard for the actual sculpting. It's an oil-based clay, and what all those words mean, if you're not familiar, is that it's a mixture. So an oil-based clay is just a mixture of waxes, oil, clay, and maybe some other proprietary ingredients. You know, talc is a pretty common additive. The NSP part is very important. It stands for non-sulfurated plastiline. Plastiline being a generic term for non-drying clays, which I believe it originates from a British clay that was marketed to children in like the 60s, 70s. I might be wrong there, but it was kind of like a British Play-Doh. But, well, I guess it was better than more artist grade than a Play-Doh. So the non-sulfurate part, that's also important because sulfur inhibits the curing of the silicone which we'll be using for the mold. And in older non-drying sculpting clays, so oil-based clays, they contain sulfur for some reason. I remember looking it up and I found out why, and then I forgot about it. And so they required different molding materials, or when silicone was finally introduced as a standard in the industry, it was, if you were going to use something sulfurated, you needed some really, really good sealing, which I'm not even sure if that was a guarantee. And so the designation of hard just refers to the softness of the clay. Since it's largely based on wax, heat softens it and allows it to be shaped. The warmer it is, the softer it is. and it can even be melted into a liquid form and poured, or, as I'm doing now, spatulaing it on. And the hardness is just determined by the types of waxes that are used in the manufacture of the clay, what their relative melting points are. Anyway, I personally prefer the harder clay just because it holds more detail and it has more resilience to being handled. I'm using a crock pot and an incandescent lamp to soften the clay so that I can spatula it on and apply it in bulk, basically. Now, the other nice thing about NSPs is that it's endlessly reusable. You probably saw I was picking some little bits of blue greeny stuff out of it when it was in the pot, and that was old silicone that had leaked in between the layers of the NSP when I was making the mold. It's also a good idea to keep the sculpt fairly dense, to not have nooks and crannies so that doesn't happen. Now, this is where one of my changes occurred. I decided the base I had made was too large. So I'm cutting a smaller base right now on the Proxxon again with a circle cutting jig, and I'm not going to show the whole process because, we've seen it once before. And let's see, there we go, it comes off. Measuring it. And now I'm just going to scrape off the old base from the sculpt and... Oh, that's okay, just break the camera. That's fine. I'm just scraping it off, trying to clean it as best I can, and then I'm going to be checking it on the base, see if I like the spacing. Again, the problem was that the original base was too big. I want this to be close. I want to be closer to the base. But I also don't want it to be huge. And I also cut this second piece, and that second piece underneath, it's larger than the primary base, and what that second piece is for, it's for attaching, it's going to make the base of the mold box. And that's sort of not really pertinent in this video. I'm working on another video with the whole molding process of this guy after he was finished being sculpted, and I'm going to discuss all of those things in that video, and giving Danny a little bit of foam to play with there. And right now I'm just sanding and shaping the base a little bit. I'm beveling the edge, and I'm going to sand it to be fairly smooth before I glue the two together. Just sanding the edges. And now with a hot glue gun, just scraping off that little dangly bit. Those bits are the worst. Just applying it to the foam, pressing them together. Pretty standard stuff. And once that's set, I'm going to go around with a bead of hot glue and seal up those cracks. Again, I don't want silicone leaking in between things. The reason why is it's a waste of silicone, and it creates these edges that need to be cleaned up. Otherwise, they start to show up in your castings, and it's annoying. By the way, if you ever get hot glue on your finger, like I did, even though I did it purposely, rub your fingers together or rub it on your pants or on something, and that distributes the heat and cools it fairly quickly, and so you don't get a burn. And I smartly decided to now smooth the rest of it with a tool. And here I'm grabbing some Mod Podge. I'm going to be using it to seal the base, just in case. I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing later, whether I'm going to be using some solvents or something along those lines, but I'm just putting on one or two good coats, just to give it some protection, give it a slightly smoother finish. And now we engage warp speed. I decided I didn't quite like the way that he was originally positioned. I wanted to give him more of a slumped, sleepy look, a little bit more of a dynamic pose, I suppose. This is the point where a Wookiee joins me. That's Kuma. She's just hanging out on the table. And I'm starting to bulk in some of the features. I cut in lines to use as guides, just like if you were drawing a portrait or something like that. Just some markers to help with proportions and things like that. I'm just putting on the feet, the teeth, trying to establish the jawline, and try to make him start to read a little bit more so that I can establish more and more proportion. And you can see I'm kind of cutting the jaw because I realized that I wasn't quite following my angle right. I'm trying to work in some rough wrinkles where flesh and stuff, he's an acorn, but I'm trying to give him some kind of relatable characteristics. And I'm trying to I'm bulking him out. I want him to start to look like a thing. And there I'm cutting away the face. I've known from the beginning that it was going to be at least 2 parts. And I originally thought that I would make the face, and there's, the doggy, make the face separate, but I decided it's better probably to make the whole top half a separate piece. So I'm going around and scoring where I'm going to be cutting it with an X-Acto. I don't know if you know this, but X-Actos have, they can smell fear, and they will bite you whenever they get a chance. Gotta be careful. X-Actos and scalpels. And this stuff, because it's I made it fairly dense, so I have to go through in quite a few passes and go again and again and again, try and get a fairly clean cut. I'm going to have to clean it up anyway, but I'm trying to establish a line that will carry through. And finally, there we go. It's often a big lump, put that into clay, and cleaning it up, shaping it, smoothing it out with a tool, and then my fingers. Getting in all those little nooks and crannies, and here I've got a mixture of paint thinner and denatured alcohol. And I'm brushing it over the surface to help smooth it. It's a solvent, specifically for oil. It's gonna dissolve the oil, wax, and that's what's gonna allow it to be smoothed out. And so I'm just brushing it with a cheapo makeup brush. Following up with sort of buffing it with a cloth, and it's good to get nice, little pieces left behind, which is, great, and very frustrating to pick out. I've since invested in a very good pair of tweezers for such occurrences, which happen often. Little threads, hairs, pet hair, dust. So now I'm going to start making the mating surface. And for that, I'm going to be using Magic Sculpt. It's called Magic Sculpt in Britain for legal reasons. And so I'm using Magic Sculpt, which is a 2-part epoxy clay. It's very similar to plumber's putty if you've ever worked with that, but it has a longer working time. And it's great. I love this stuff. It cures rock hard, but still being able to be tooled. And so it's a 2-part. So you take equal parts by volume. You need to mix them together really well. I usually squish them together and then start making a coil out of it. And then twist that up, quill it again, twist it up, quill it again. It should be nice and uniform in color. The hardest part is usually getting 2 even-sized balls, but honestly, this stuff's pretty forgiving. I've even taken more or less of one ingredient to play with the working times and cure times. On a note, if you do ever use this stuff and you want it to cure faster, putting it in a hot area will help. I've actually built a a curing oven just for this purpose, and bringing it up to like 100 or so degrees, or directly under a heat lamp or something, and I can get it to cure in about 30 minutes. It usually takes about 2.5 to 3 hours. So I've got it all mixed, and I'm just going to start applying it. I want to get this sort of, I'm just trying to make the surface of it. I'm pressing it down, and as you can see, it's in a unique shape, so that when it does come off, it'll go back in only one position. And I'm working on making the border right now because I want to be able to put clay on that border at the joint so that I can shape it and try to make the transition as seamless as possible. There'll still be a seam, but hopefully I can make it, you know, the best that I can. Just going around, it's all sort of careful work. Got about 45 minutes when it's after it's been mixed. And like I said before, it'll take about 2.5, 3 hours to cure. The reason why I'm using this stuff is because if I were to just make the other half out of clay, it would eventually stick. I'd have to pry it apart. Doing it like this, most of the surface is not going to stick to it, to the clay, so it'll be easier to come apart as I'm working on it. And now I'm just going through and notching and toothing up the Sculpt while it's still workable. So that'll provide me with a tooth for the clay to grab onto, so that when I pull them apart, there's more grip on the top half, so that it comes with the top half. It doesn't stick around. And now you might notice a seam change. We're constantly trying to improve the small space that Daniel and I call a shop, so after some modifications, I'm now situated on the other side of the barn, and we sort of centralized the casting, painting, and sculpting area. Anyway, the Sculpt is cured, and I'm trying to pry these two parts apart. And even though the clay is largely wax and oil, the hold it has on the epoxy is pretty tenacious. I'm not sure if there's like a suction component or not going on here, but yeah, it was pretty rough. I'm trying a few different tools, and I'm just trying to pry it up, and I don't know if you can tell, but oh, there, you know, again, trying to not break the camera. Well, nothing broke, but I'm going to try a different approach, going in with a thin spatula, and I'm just going to sort of slide it up between, trying to get it to scrape across the epoxy, because I think what's happening is that there's just so much surface, this large flat, and I don't have much of a place to grip, but now you can see that it's starting to come up, and there we go. Just a matter of the surface area, pulling it down. So here's some naphtha. I'm just going to clean off the epoxy piece. I want it to be nice and clean so that there's not clay that wants to stick to the other clay as it sits and gets worked on, because as I'm working on it, I'm going to be putting pressure on it. It's going to be pressing into the mating surface. So if there's clay on it, it's just going to start to rip up, stuff like that. And I think in a little bit, I believe I'm going to be waxing it as well. But right now, I just cleaned that up. I've got my clay under a incandescent bulb. It's heating up. It's soft now. And start bulking it out. I'm just grabbing hunks, shaping it, trying to keep it all nice and compact so that, again, the silicone doesn't just leak through everywhere. Making sure it all still fits, it's not distorted or anything like that. More bulking out. So I'm just cleaving off hunks of clay off the block, letting them warm up. I mark the center lines again, bulking it all out. Working on the feet, changing the way that the foot was. I wanted to be more of like a passed out or dozing off, kind of arm up. I'm establishing the brow line, the eyes. I'm trying to go around the whole thing and establish just the overall look and feel of him. I work slowly, so it takes a while. Now I'm trying to establish the eyes, and I want them to be sort of lids closed, and I thought I would try doing it out of just in the clay itself, but I've never liked doing it like that. So what I have here is I carved out the sockets, and I have some resin spheres that I cast. These I made a mold a while ago that's just out of some ball bearings, specifically for this purpose, different sizes, and whenever I have extra resin I just pour it into that mold. So I have a bunch of different size ball bearing, spheres. And doing it this way allows me to build it up the same way I would draw eyes, which is to start with a sphere and then build up from there, adding the lids and the other features around it so that everything sits on top of it naturally. Or at least as natural as I can get it. And so I'm just sort of pushing and pulling and trying to get it look fairly right. Not perfect, but fairly right. Again, I want him to look kind of sleepy. Or maybe I'd eventually decide to make him just basically just as to when he passed out. I'm trying to not focus too much on one spot. I'm trying to go around and, again, get the overall feel of him, because if you just focus on one spot, it ends up being that it sort of falls out of proportion and you end up having to redo it. So that's also why I'm not putting in too much detail anywhere. And in fact, this is very far from being detailed at this point. Turning him upside down to get a different vantage point. Different angle of attack for the sculpting tool. I want him to be kind of slumping, and I mean, he is a baby after all. He's an acorn. He's got a long way to go to become the giant tree that Shambles becomes. And now I'm starting to roll out coils to start on the cap. And I'm going to apply the coils, and then I'm going to go in with a soldering iron to really make sure it's on there, so that when I'm working on it, if I put on a lot of force, it doesn't delaminate from it, which happens with this kind of clay. And we're just building and building and building. And I want to get to a state where it reads like fairly well before I start any actual detail. When I say read, I mean that when you look at it, you shouldn't be confused. You should know what it is, even if you're a complete stranger to it. I put the little stem on just to see what it looks like. I'm working on the feet a little bit. Talking to someone. And as we've learned, everybody poops. And now you might be asking why am I mentioning that? Well, I'm mentioning that because I'm currently ahead in my script as I'm doing the VO. But now, again, everybody poops. And since everybody poops, everybody needs a butt. So I'm working on his butt. I mean, come on, he's a baby. He's got a little tush. Even treants need a butt. And now I'm sort of going in and working on the other leg a little bit more, the two back legs. And I kind of have this tendency to build up the clay and peck away at it, pushing and pulling, and all the while, even though this is a fantasy creature and I made them up. I'm trying to think of anatomy that makes sense. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm still learning. But, you know, the way you learn is by applying what knowledge you have and then finding what you're weak in and learning more, and applying that and learning more and going back and forth. And that's, you know, that's all. Mostly, I want him to feel grounded in reality. You know, I'm not trying to make him an extremely cartoony character. You know, I'm okay with him having certain cartoony attributes, sort of in the same way that a puppy sometimes looks, you know, almost like it shouldn't be in real life. It's too cute. But anyway, so I'm shaping the arms. Trying to think of where the deltoid, the bicep, the tricep, and the brachialis are before it converges into the sort of the root structure appearance that is the hands. And I mean, a lot of this is honestly just putting down clay, removing whatever doesn't look right until it starts to look wrong, adding in more, etc., etc. And the other thing I found is that when working with sculpting tools, there are very few I actually remember using, and I grab whatever tool looks right, see if it works right for me in the moment, and then use it a lot if it does. Or if it doesn't, I move on to another. And that's why you might see some of my tools have a red band on them, or some red electrical tape, and that's to remind me that, oh, this one was useful. Because I honestly can't remember, because I'm not really paying that much attention to the tool. I'm paying attention to the tip of the tool, where it's contacting the clay, the marks that it's making. And I try to make marks in different ways with the tools to see what works. It's always going to be different, depending on what you're working on. And you're always going to be improving. So your technique is constantly going to change. You know, sometimes you need to drag it hard, drag it gently. A lot of times tapping and moving the clay very slowly works best. If you press too hard, the clay can sort of start to rip off in these stress lines that you didn't even know were there, but they showed up when you were putting the clay down. And again, it's just push and pull, thinking about the anatomy as best I can. I'm refining it. I'm going into these little cracks and crevices that are there, and I'm trying to sort of push them a little bit, but also trying to keep them soft. If they're too hard, then, if they're too sharp, what happens is that when the clay gets in there, it ends up being too dangly. So when you cast it, it will rip out. So the whole time, I'm thinking about how this is going to work as a mold and a casting as well. And I'm not perfect in that regard either. I've had things fail, rip out all the time. I spent a lot of time and a lot of money making molds that didn't work that well. I was still able to get use out of them, but you know, that's how you learn. And he's starting to take shape now. He's still very rough, but he's starting to look like something. And again, I'm going around, I'm working on different spots, fixing things that don't make sense. Looking at the proportions, trying to get that occlusion to happen. Occlusion just being, occlusion shadows refer to where two things come into contact with another. They create a darker shadow than anywhere else. At least in drawing, and I mean, I might be misappropriating the term, I'm not sure. I'm fixing up the other arm now, adding the deltoid. Deltoid being the shoulder muscles, basically. Or muscle. Well, it's a group of 3 muscles, I believe. And again, I'm pecking and pushing and pressing, shaping the jaw as it rests on the hand. It'll cause the jaw to shift and the muscles and flesh to shift as well, but I think it's way over exaggerated here. I soften it a lot later on, I think. I can't remember exactly, but I remember spending a lot of time in that general area. And again, just going back and forth and back and forth. Yep, there we go. I'm adjusting the jaw, moving it back and up. Because I'm looking at the proportions of it, and I'm not concerned with being absolutely perfect symmetric, because that doesn't exist in nature, and it takes away, it makes things feel a little bit unnatural, and it's also, it can be boring in something like this. It's more interesting for your eye to look around and see all these little imperfections that you might not realize that they're there, you know. But at the same time, while it's fine to have those imperfections, I don't want it to be distracting. And I don't want someone to be looking at this and saying, there's something very wrong here, or there's something not right. So I'm using some silicone brushes to do some smoothing, and I use them a lot later for the detail work. Going in and refining the delineations between muscles and limbs and things like that. Fixing up those front teeth. Shaping them a bit more. And making sure that he has a certain sort of protuberance to the front of his face. It's basically the dental sphere. And again, refining some of that jaw. He's rough, but he's starting to really take shape now. Is that you can start to see that there's something there, giving him more bubble to his butt. You know, you need something in the caboose. And now we come to mistake number 2. Well, it's not a mistake. I had a change of plans, and I'll go into detail of that because it has to do with the mold making in the molding video. But I came up with a way to ensure a consistent and flat base when I poured the resin. But it required the 2 parts of the base to be able to be separated halfway through the molding process. And it also required a thicker base for the mold bottom. And so I separated them on my hot wire cutter. I cut through the hot glue that way. And I'm using some molten clay same clay, just in a liquid form. And I'm using it to glue it together so that's removable. And because this is 2 pieces of insulation foam, it's insulating the heat, so the clay's cooling fairly slowly. I have a lot of time to position him so that he's got enough space around him for the mold. And now we start the monotonous and meticulous detailing. And the way that I go about it, at least for now, is that to me it's a series of marks layered on top of each other. And this is going to be like a soft wood grain kind of thing, some dimension but not too much. And there we go, still fixing the jaw. So I'm also refining it a little bit more. This is probably the beginning of the day. I've got fresh eyes. That's also important, taking breaks and just coming in and looking at something with a fresh look, And I'm working on the ribs there. I don't quite like the position there. It doesn't make sense. So going under sort of almost straight down. Seems to work better. Again, I just want them to have some kind of grounding in reality. And I've sped this video. So this was originally a time-lapse video, and I've sped it up I think 5 times. So I think that probably shows you how slow at least I go right now. I'm refining things as needed, putting a little bit of extra dimension there. Tightening it up. Again, adding the ribs on the other side. The wooden tool that I use, I don't know what it's actually called, but it's like a standard for most sculpting kits. I had a sculpting kit, and I used that tool for a while, and I was working on, I think it was actually this in the beginning. I was using it, and it snapped on me, and so I remade it out of I think it's cherry. It works great, and now it's just back to more meticulous. I think I sped this up even more, smoothing some clay out onto the base to give it a nice smooth appearance, and I think then I'm going in and starting more detail work. Pecking at it, making drag marks. The drag marks are, I'm intentionally leaving raised edges and little bits from when the tool drags across it, and I'm going to go in later with a silicone brush. There we go. Going in with a silicone brush to pat those down so that they add dimension to it. And here I am starting to put in the pour spout. And I want to put the pour spout in now before I start on the hat, so that I'm not disturbing the texture. I'm pushing it in real deep so that it can stand on its own in the mold. Cleaning things up a little bit in there. I'm draping a paper towel over it because when I go to cut it, I want to keep the dust from getting all over it, over the sculpt. And I'm refining the tip right now a little bit. Or the stem, I suppose. Giving a little bit of a bevel to it. And then I'll be cutting where that line is. And that line is particular. It's enough space above it for the silicone. And also to provide a little well of extra resin for when this goes in and is cast. Because you want to have a little bit of extra in there. I'm cutting with a coping saw because I could have used a pneumatic reciprocating saw, I could have used a Dremel, but the coping saw just seemed to have the most control over the amount of stress I was going to be putting on the sculpt. And so now we can start texturing the hat and going in and doing more texture work on the rest of him. And this is just it's just a series of marks. I'm going in with the tool and just pop, 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 pop. And the hat was probably the most tedious. I think I ended up doing about 3 or 4 layers of texture, but I ended up being happy with it in the end. Again, I'm trying to make it read like an acorn. And I don't know if you can notice this, but I'm trying not to disturb the other textures that I've worked on too much. I'm handling it by the pour spout and by the base, making these weird claws. I'm also using my pinky finger as an anchor point for the tools, so that I can use it as an anchor point, a registration point, and I can get a consistent sort of stamping action that way. I'm resting the pinky on the model, I'm resting it on the banding wheel. At times I'll rest one arm on the other. Starting to getting there. Slowly but surely he's getting there. And again, I'm going in and trying to get a nice occlusion shadow to make it look like the hat is, you know, it's going to come off at some point. It's not smooth and integrated into him. Going in with a silicone brush and sort of tamping down some of that texture, using it to create some softer, subtler parts. Going in with metal tools and doing the same thing, accentuating parts. I mean, all this is, you know, just detail. I'm going with a brush, try to sort of brush off any little bits, smooth things out a little bit. I think I'm using a solvent there. I also kind of like, in this case, the brush will sometimes leave brush marks, which are good for wood texture as well. It works. And then after that, again, I'm going in, I'm accentuating the parts that I like, I'm pushing some of them down so that they don't show up as much. I'm trying to give him a lot of dimension. And if I do it right, I don't mess up all that dimension in the paint job at the end. But that's not in this video. Actually, I haven't recorded any of the painting. Maybe I will. I'm trying to not be too consistent anywhere. Again, this is something that's natural. You know, this took hours and hours and hours, but it was kind of nice. I'm putting in a little bit of detail, a little crack, just something to give it some asymmetry, a little point of interest to look at from the side. I'm going through, adding more and more and more marks. Brushing. Tightening up everything as much as I can. Thinking about the weather, probably. Maybe not. Thinking more about what I'm going to say in all the dead space in the VO. Wishing that I had a better microphone so that I could just record everything in the shop and not have to worry about VO. And then sequentially going to Amazon and buying a lapel mic for future videos. And then putting all that into the VO. Definitely not for filling time. But oh, there we go. Picking off little hairs. That's another fun part. Just going in, starting the brow texture. I like how the brows came out a lot, actually. I think they give him a lot of character. And it's just all sort of more of the same. I'm sure that there are better ways to do these kinds of textures. And, you know, I just haven't found those. If you know of some, I'd love to hear them. You know, learning is what all this is about. Trying to put a little bit of texture on the eyelids. Just something. And if you notice, I specifically left one of them open a little bit more. I just watching my dog sleep. I've noticed that her eyes don't close the same, and one of them sort of remains slightly open a lot of the time. I thought that was pretty neat to put in, to give it a little bit more life. I wanted to try and capture him to be sort of just dozing off. Anyway. It's sort of the purview of both young children and old men. Or I suppose babies. Babies and old people. Is old people offensive? I don't think so. Not necessarily. Well, I guess senior citizens, but oh well. Cleaning up the mouth a little bit. Everyone can use some dental work, you know. Accentuating some of the wrinkles on the face. I want the face to have the most detail, or at least the most apparent detail, so that it draws your eye in more. It's the moneymaker, after all. Sort of tucking in those folds a little bit, you know. Trying to get more dimension, as much dimension in there as I can. Trying to get that seam line to blend a little bit more. And then, of course, very important, get a cat in there, pet it a lot, make sure that its hair goes everywhere. This is really important. Put a cat on the workbench, make sure she kicks all your tools on the floor, disrupts everything, and then, yeah. Pick cat hair out from your tools and sculpts for the next year. Very, very important, people. Never forget that step. Man, that GoPro really does put in some fisheye, don't it? Oh well. Yeah, we're just using GoPros for now. Just very affordable. You know, good quality for the price and whatnot. Also, the other thing is, the reason why I'm doing this video really is because I spent a lot of time watching sculpting videos probably about a year ago, 2 years ago, and I was always frustrated that I never seemed to be able to see exactly what they were doing, what movements they were making, things like that. And so I wanted to try and to capture that in my videos. And so the camera is in a very uncomfortable spot, I'll tell you that much. Definitely why a lot of people don't put the camera in such a spot. This one is all sped up and not stop motion. You know, there's a word for it. I used the word earlier. Can't remember the word. It's not time warp. Time warp's a setting on the GoPro. Time lapse. It's time lapse. But in the future, I'll probably do. Oh, it's done. It's done. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you found this video enjoyable. If you learned something from it, that's great. I'm going to be working on the molding video for this guy and casting after that, but keep an eye on us if it interests you. Thanks a lot, and have a good one. But